Everything I was taught about success was wrong. Every single thing. Get good grades, go to college, work for 30 years, save your money, make connections, climb the ladder, all of it. And the day I stopped believing all of it was the day I started getting rich. I'm 74 years old. I have a net worth of $1.4 million. I didn't graduate high school. I retired at 65 with $11,247 in my checking account. I knew 3 people in my entire town, and 2 of them were my mailman and the guy who fixed my truck. No college buddies calling with investment tips. No fraternity brothers opening doors. No country club connections handing me opportunities on silver platters. Yet today, I'm wealthier than my neighbor who has an MBA from Northwestern. I'm wealthier than the guy at church who worked 37 years at IBM and retired with a full pension. I'm wealthier than my own brother-in-law who spent 40 years climbing the corporate ladder at some insurance company in Chicago. How is that possible? Because everything they told us about building wealth is designed for people who already have wealth. The system is rigged, but not in the way you think. It's rigged against people who follow the rules. And I'm about to prove it to you. Let me paint you a picture of where I was 9 years ago. March 2017, 65 years old, sitting in my kitchen on Elm Street in a town nobody's ever heard of in Missouri. My wife Margaret had passed 2 years earlier. Cancer. The medical bills ate through our savings like fire through dry grass. The life insurance barely covered her funeral. I'd worked construction for 38 years. Good work, honest work, but construction workers don't get pensions. We don't get stock options. We get paychecks, and when the work stops, the paychecks stop. I had Social Security coming. $1,842 a month. And that was it. That was my retirement plan. Sitting at that table looking at my bank statement, I did the math. After rent, utilities, groceries, and my truck payment, I had maybe $200 left over each month. $200. In 10 years, I'd be 75 and probably need help with everything. In 20 years, if I was lucky enough to live that long, I'd be eating cat food and praying the utilities didn't get shut off. That's when the panic set in. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, the quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest at 3 in the morning and whispers, "You're done, Harold. This is it. You failed." Before I share what happened next, I want you to do something. Write in the comments right now, "I build my wealth starting today." Not tomorrow, not next month, today. Because what I'm about to tell you only works for people who decide first. I spent the next 6 months doing what everyone said I should do. I clipped coupons. I bought generic everything. I canceled my cable and sat in the dark watching rabbit-ear television that barely picked up 2 channels. I drove 10 minutes out of my way to save 3 cents on gas. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every single day. You know what happened? I saved $73. $73 in 6 months of living like a monk. Meanwhile, my truck needed new brakes. My water heater started making that sound that means it's about to die. And my property taxes went up $47 a month because the school district needed more money. I was getting poorer trying to save money. The harder I squeezed, the faster it slipped through my fingers. That's when I realized the first truth. Poor people can't save their way to wealth. It's mathematically impossible. If you're starting with nothing, saving nothing gets you more nothing. But here's what really woke me up. I went to a financial advisor. Free consultation. This guy had certificates all over his wall, a mahogany desk bigger than my kitchen table, and a firm handshake that screamed, "Trust me with your money." He looked at my situation and recommended I put my $11,000 into a conservative mutual fund that would earn me about 4% a year. 4% on $11,000. That's $440 a year before taxes and fees. About $36 a month. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because this college-educated, suit-wearing, certificate-having expert just told me that the best I could hope for was an extra tank of gas every month. "What about my friend Tommy?" I asked him. "He bought a duplex last year and it's making him $800 a month after expenses." The advisor got that look. You know the one. The look that says, "Oh, you're one of those people who thinks they're smarter than they are." "Real estate is very risky, Mr. Ashford," he said. "You could lose everything." I looked around his fancy office, at his fancy suit, at his fancy certificates, and I thought, "Buddy, I already lost everything. What exactly am I protecting here?" That's when it hit me. The whole system, college, careers, financial advisors, retirement planning, it's all designed for people who have something to lose. People with 401ks and stock portfolios and family money they don't want to risk. But when you're starting with nothing, risk isn't the enemy. Playing it safe is the enemy. Most people click away when someone tells them they're wrong about money. You didn't. Hit subscribe. I walked out of that advisor's office and drove straight to Denny's. Not because I was hungry, but because I needed to think. And I think better with coffee and pie. That's where I met Earl. Earl was sitting 3 booths over, reading a real estate investing book and taking notes on a napkin. He was maybe 68, 70 years old, wearing work clothes like me, calloused hands like me. But something about him was different. He had this confidence, this ease, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. I'm not usually the type to strike up conversations with strangers, but something made me walk over. "Excuse me," I said. "That book any good?" He looked up, smiled, and said, "Son, this book made me more money than 40 years of honest work ever did." Earl had been a plumber, retired 3 years earlier with about as much as I had, next to nothing. But in those 3 years, he'd bought 4 rental properties, not mansions, not fancy apartments downtown, small houses in working-class neighborhoods that needed work, houses that people like us could afford to buy and people like us needed to rent. "College boys won't touch these properties," Earl told me. "Too much work, too risky, not glamorous enough. But that's exactly why they work. No competition from people with deep pockets." He opened his notebook, not some fancy leather planner, just a spiral notebook from Dollar General, and showed me his numbers. Property 1, bought for $23,000, put $8,000 into it, rents for $650 a month. Property 2, bought for $31,000, put $12,000 into it, rents for $750 a month. After expenses, insurance, taxes, and setting aside money for repairs, he was clearing about $1,900 a month. $2,300 a month from 4 little houses. More than my Social Security. More than I'd ever made in construction some months. And Earl, remember, had no college degree, no connections, no business background. Just a willingness to learn and the guts to try. "But how did you get started?" I asked. "Where'd you get the money for the down payments?" Earl laughed. "Harold, you're thinking like a college boy again. Who said anything about down payments?" That's when he explained seller financing, owner financing, lease options, contract for deed, all these ways to buy property without banks, without credit checks, without 20% down. Ways that people who went to business school learn in their real estate courses. but regular folks like us never hear about. The secret, Earl said, is that half the houses for sale in America are owned by people who don't want to be landlords anymore. They just want out. And they don't care if you went to college or have perfect credit. They care if you can make the payments and take care of the property. I left Denny's with Earl's phone number and 3 book recommendations. Over the next 2 weeks, I read those books cover to cover. Not because I'm some natural student. I barely made it through high school. But because for the first time in my life, I was reading about something that made sense to me. Everything else, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, IRAs, it was all abstract. Numbers on a screen controlled by people in New York I'd never meet. But real estate? I understood real estate. I'd spent 38 years fixing things, building things, knowing what made a house valuable and what made it a money pit. Someone showed me something called the identity switch. It says the word retired is the most expensive word in the English language. The moment I stopped saying it, money started flowing. Link is below. By April, I'd found my first deal, a little 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, about 6 blocks from where I lived. The owner was a woman named Mrs. Patterson, maybe 75 years old, whose husband had passed the year before. She'd been trying to sell the house for 8 months. Every potential buyer either wanted her to drop the price by $10,000 or walked away after the inspection. "I just want out," she told me when I knocked on her door. "I can't deal with tenants and repairs and all this landlord stuff anymore. I just want to move to Florida and be done with it." The house was worth maybe $45,000 in good condition. It needed about $6,000 in work. New roof, some plumbing, paint inside and out, new carpets. Mrs. Patterson had it listed for $38,000, which was already below market. But she wasn't getting any bites because most buyers couldn't see past the problems. I made her an offer she'd never heard before. "Mrs. Patterson, what if I gave you $500 a month for the next 6 years? No banks, no inspections, no real estate agents taking their cut. Just me paying you directly until the house is mine." She did the math. 500 times 72 months, $36,000. 3,000 less than her asking price, but guaranteed money every month. No hassle, no repairs, no dealing with renters who might trash the place. "You'd really do that?" she asked. "You'd take care of everything?" That's when I realized the second truth. People with no advantages often make the best deals because we can't afford to be picky. We can't afford to walk away from opportunities that require work. College boys see a house that needs $6,000 in repairs and run. Guys like me see a house that needs $6,000 in repairs and think, "I can do most of that myself." I spent the next 3 months fixing up Mrs. Patterson's house every evening after work and all day Saturdays. New shingles, new bathroom fixtures, sanded and stained the hardwood floors, painted every room, replaced the kitchen sink. Cost me about $4,800 in materials, plus maybe 200 hours of my time. By July, I had the house rent ready. Posted an ad on Craigslist. Clean 2BR house, quiet neighborhood, $625 a month. Within a week, I had a tenant, a young couple who both worked at Walmart. Good people who needed a clean, affordable place to live. $625 coming in every month. $500 going to Mrs. Patterson. $125 left over after I set aside money for taxes, insurance, and repairs. It doesn't sound like much, but remember, this was money I was making while I slept. Money I didn't have to trade my time and body for. More importantly, it proved the concept. It proved Earl was right. It proved the college boys and their financial advisors were playing a completely different game than the one I needed to be playing. Over the next year, I found 3 more deals. Not all of them were as straightforward as Mrs. Patterson's house, but they all had the same basic structure: motivated sellers, properties that needed work, monthly payments instead of big down payments. By the time I turned 67, I was making $2,400 a month from 4 rental properties. Combined with Social Security, I had over $4,200 coming in every month. More money than I'd ever made working construction. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because around that time, I started running into my old co-workers from the construction company. Guys I'd worked with for decades. And they were struggling. Really struggling. Big Jim had worked the same job as me for 35 years. But Jim had gone to community college for 2 years before getting into construction. Jim had connections. His uncle was a foreman. His brother-in-law ran electrical for another company. Jim had always made more money than me, had better health insurance, got the better assignments. When I saw Jim at the hardware store in November 2019, he looked terrible. Thin, worried, aged 10 years in the 2 since I'd seen him. "Harold," he said, trying to sound cheerful, "how's retirement treating you?" "Can't complain," I said. "Staying busy. How about you?" That's when it all came out. Jim's pension wasn't what he thought it would be. After taxes and health insurance premiums, his monthly check was about $1,400. Combined with Social Security, he had maybe $3,200 a month. Sounds decent, but Jim's house payment was $1,850. He'd refinanced 3 times over the years, pulled out equity for his kids' college tuitions, family vacations, a boat he used maybe 6 times. Jim, who'd always been better positioned than me, always had more advantages, more connections, more education, was living paycheck to paycheck at 68 years old. He was talking about getting a part-time job at Home Depot just to make ends meet. That conversation changed everything for me, because it made me realize the third truth. The traditional path isn't just slow, it's broken. All those advantages that Jim had, the education, the connections, the steady job with benefits, they led him to the exact same place I would have ended up if I'd followed the financial advisor's advice. Barely scraping by, hoping nothing big went wrong. But I'd taken a different path. The path they tell you not to take. The risky path. The path for people who don't know any better. And I was financially free while Jim was talking about bagging groceries. Look, I'm 74. I'm not trying to build a business or sell courses. I just put down the 7 things that actually worked. Called it the Wealth After 65 Code. If it helps you skip even one of the years I wasted, that's enough for me. Link below. The difference wasn't intelligence. Jim's smarter than me. Always was. The difference wasn't work ethic. We both worked hard our entire lives. The difference was that I got forced off the traditional path early enough to find a better one. See, when you have advantages, you rely on them. When you have a good job, you think that job will take care of you forever. When you have connections, you wait for them to come through with opportunities. When you have a college degree, you think you're too smart for risky investments like real estate. But when you have nothing, you get creative. You get scrappy. You learn to see opportunities that advantaged people miss because those opportunities require work, require getting your hands dirty, require dealing with problems instead of avoiding them. Earl taught me something that no college professor ever could have. The best deals go to the people who aren't afraid of problems, because problems are just opportunities wearing work clothes. By 2021, I owned 8 rental properties. By 2023, I owned 12. My net worth crossed $1 million sometime around my 72nd birthday. Not because I'm special, not because I got lucky, but because I learned to play a different game than the one they teach in school. Here's what they don't tell you about building wealth without advantages. It's actually easier in some ways. Because you can't afford to be picky, you learn to evaluate deals based on cash flow instead of prestige. Because you can't hire everything out, you learn skills that save you thousands. Because you don't have a safety net, you learn to be careful without being paralyzed. My neighbor Carl knocked on my door last month. Carl's got a master's degree in business from St. Louis University. Worked 28 years for a Fortune 500 company. Had every advantage you could want. Harold, he said, I need to ask you something. How are you doing this? How are you making more money retired than I ever made working? I invited him in, made coffee, and spent 2 hours explaining what Earl had taught me in Denny's 6 years earlier. Carl listened, took notes, asked good questions. Smart guy. But at the end, he shook his head. I don't know, Harold. It sounds risky. What if something goes wrong? What if the market crashes? What if you can't find tenants? Same questions the financial advisor had asked. Same concerns that keep college-educated people poor. Because they've been taught to avoid risk instead of managing it. They've been taught to protect what they have instead of building what they need. Carl went back to his conservative mutual funds earning 4% a year. I bought my 13th property 2 weeks later. That's the fundamental difference between people with advantages and people without them. People with advantages play not to lose. People without advantages play to win. And in a game where playing not to lose guarantees you lose slowly, playing to win is the only rational strategy. Today, my rental properties generate $4,800 a month in passive income. Combined with Social Security, I'm bringing in over $6,600 a month. More than I ever dreamed of making when I was swinging a hammer for a living. But the money isn't even the best part. The best part is the freedom, the knowledge that I'm not dependent on anyone, not the government, not some pension fund, not my kids who have their own problems to worry about. If Social Security gets cut tomorrow, I'll be fine. If inflation keeps going up, my rents go up too. If the economy crashes, people still need places to live. Do me a favor. Write in the comments, my age is my advantage. I know that sounds backward, but if you watch this whole video, you already understand why it's true. No degree taught me this. No savings account could have funded it. No connections handed it to me on a silver platter. I learned it from Earl, a retired plumber sitting in a Denny's booth with a spiral notebook from Dollar General. And Earl learned it from someone else who didn't have advantages either. That's how real wealth gets built. Not in boardrooms or MBA programs, but in diners and hardware stores and front porches, passed from one person who figured it out to another person who needs to hear it. Your lack of advantages isn't holding you back. Your advantages are.